They mocked him for being poor, never knowing he controlled more money than their families combined. The moment his true identity was revealed, their laughter turned into stunned silence. At first glance, Nathaniel Carter looked like an easy target. Dressed in faded jeans and a thrift store hoodie, he moved through the school halls with his head down, avoiding attention. He never flaunted expensive gadgets, never showed off designer brands, and never spoke about his home life. To his classmates, he was invisible, a nobody, and in high school, nobodies were easy prey. For years, Nathaniel had endured the taunts, the relentless whispers behind his back, the occasional shove in the hallway, and the cruel jokes made at his expense. He learned to ignore it, focusing instead on his grades and the quiet life he built for himself outside of school. But what his peers didn't know, what they never even suspected, was that Nathaniel Carter was not the boy they thought he was. He wasn't just another struggling student trying to make it through the school year. He was, in fact, the secret heir to one of the largest technology conglomerates in the world. Raised by his grandfather, a self-made billionaire, Nathaniel had been groomed to take over the empire since childhood. But wealth, to him, was not something to be paraded around. It was a responsibility. And so he kept his secret buried deep. Despite his staggering wealth, Nathaniel chose to live simply. His grandfather, Henry Carter, had instilled in him the belief that wealth without humility was a curse. True strength, his grandfather would say, is not in what you own, but in who you become. Nathaniel took those words to heart. He insisted on attending a public high school instead of the exclusive private academies available to him. He wanted to understand the world beyond his wealth, to experience life as an ordinary teenager. But life as an ordinary teenager was far from easy. At school, he was nothing more than a faceless figure to most, and a punching bag to a select few. Lucas Anderson, the school's golden boy, had made Nathaniel his personal target. Along with his circle of wealthy friends, Lucas made it his mission to remind Nathaniel of his place, or at least the place they thought he belonged. They never knew that the poor kid they pushed around was the one signing deals with international investors after school hours. They never imagined that the boy eating alone in the cafeteria had the power to change their futures. But that was about to change. Nathaniel had grown accustomed to the routine humiliation. Each day brought new insults, new pranks, and new reminders that he was an outsider in a world ruled by appearances. He never reacted, never fought back, and never gave them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Instead, he spent his time buried in books, not just schoolwork, but business reports, financial analyses, and technological innovations. While his classmates worried about social media status and weekend parties, Nathaniel was silently preparing for a future that none of them could imagine. His only solace came from his childhood friend, Lily Harper. Unlike the others, Lily saw beyond his ragged clothes and quiet demeanor. She admired his intelligence, his resilience, and his unwavering determination. She never pried into his life, but she sensed there was more to Nathaniel than he let on. Despite being a scholarship student herself, she faced far less ridicule than Nathaniel. Yet she never abandoned him, always choosing to sit beside him at lunch, defend him when the bullying went too far, and offer the only kindness he knew in those cold school hallways. But even Lily had no idea who Nathaniel truly was. And soon, neither she nor anyone else would be able to ignore the truth any longer. Everything changed on a single afternoon. It started with another one of Lucas's cruel pranks. This time, he had orchestrated something particularly humiliating, a fake charity drive in Nathaniel's name. Flyers were plastered around the school, depicting Nathaniel as a desperate case in need of donations for basic necessities. Laughter echoed through the halls as students tossed pennies and crumpled dollar bills at him, mocking his so-called poverty. Nathaniel stood there, his fists clenched at his sides. This wasn't the first time he had been humiliated, but this was different. This wasn't just a joke. It was a public spectacle, designed to strip him of every ounce of dignity. He could feel the heat of shame rising in his cheeks, but before he could react, something unexpected happened. His phone buzzed. A message from his grandfather flashed on the screen. "It's time. Let them see who you really are." With a deep breath, Nathaniel straightened his posture. For the first time, he met Lucas's eyes, not with fear, but with quiet confidence. The moment had arrived. It was time to reveal the truth, and in doing so, shatter every assumption they had ever made about him. Nathaniel stood frozen, his grandfather's words still flashing on his phone screen. It was time. Time to stop hiding. Time to let them all see who he really was. He pocketed his phone, exhaling deeply as he looked around at the crowd of students gathered before him. Their mocking laughter was beginning to fade, confusion creeping in as they watched him straighten his posture, no longer hunched over in submission. He wasn't the helpless target they had always assumed him to be. Lucas, still basking in his own cruelty, stepped closer, arms crossed, sneering at Nathaniel. "What's wrong, Carter? Gonna cry?" he taunted. The group behind him chuckled, but their laughter was noticeably more hesitant now. There was something different about Nathaniel, a shift in energy. Nathaniel took a step forward. "No, Lucas," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I think it's time you understood who I really am." Before Lucas could react, the distant hum of engines filled the air. Heads turned toward the school entrance as a convoy of black SUVs glided onto campus, their polished exteriors reflecting the afternoon sun. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the vehicles came to a smooth halt, their tinted windows concealing their occupants. The entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't normal. Something big was happening. The doors to the first SUV swung open, and out stepped a tall man in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. James Holloway, the chief financial officer of Carter Industries. Nathaniel recognized him instantly. James had been one of his grandfather's most trusted advisors since before Nathaniel was born. The rest of the students, however, were clueless, except for those whose parents moved in elite business circles. Even they only had the faintest idea of who he was. Lucas's confidence wavered. "What? What is this?" he muttered, taking an involuntary step back. His friends exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to laugh it off or take the situation seriously. The school principal, visibly flustered, rushed forward to greet the newcomers. He extended a hand to James Holloway, who barely acknowledged him. Instead, the CFO's piercing gaze landed directly on Nathaniel. "Mr. Carter," he said, nodding respectfully, "your grandfather has requested your presence." The collective silence that followed was deafening. Every student in the courtyard stood motionless, their expressions morphing from curiosity to outright disbelief. Nathaniel simply nodded, stepping toward the waiting vehicles. As he passed Lucas, he paused briefly, looking him dead in the eye. "You were right about one thing, Lucas," Nathaniel said quietly. "I don't belong here." Then, without another word, he continued walking, leaving Lucas standing there speechless for the first time in his life. Nathaniel stepped into the awaiting black SUV as murmurs filled the air. Students whispered furiously amongst themselves, exchanging glances of shock and disbelief. Lucas, for the first time in his life, had nothing to say. His arrogance crumbled in an instant as he realized the extent of his mistake. Nathaniel wasn't just another student. He was power itself. Inside the SUV, James Holloway handed Nathaniel a sleek tablet. "Your grandfather wants you to review the latest projections before the board meeting," he said. Nathaniel nodded, his fingers gliding effortlessly across the screen as he analyzed financial reports and market shares. This was the world he had been raised in, the world that set him apart from the very people who mocked him. Meanwhile, at school, the news spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with rumors, pictures, and speculation. Students scrolled through search engines, their jaws dropping as they confirmed the truth. Nathaniel Carter, the boy they ridiculed, was a billionaire heir. Lucas's hands trembled as he refreshed his phone. Every article, every headline confirmed the reality he refused to accept. He had spent years bullying someone who had the power to buy and sell everything he knew. And for the first time, Lucas felt something unfamiliar: fear. Nathaniel, however, had bigger plans than revenge. He was about to make a decision that would change everything. Nathaniel stepped into the awaiting black SUV as murmurs filled the air. Students whispered furiously amongst themselves, exchanging glances of shock and disbelief. Lucas had nothing to say for the first time in his life. His arrogance crumbled in an instant as he realized the extent of his mistake. Nathaniel wasn't just another student. He was power itself. Inside the SUV, James Holloway handed Nathaniel a sleek tablet. "Your grandfather wants you to review the latest projections before the board meeting," he said. Nathaniel nodded, his fingers gliding effortlessly across the screen as he analyzed financial reports and market shares. This was the world he had been raised in, the world that set him apart from the very people who mocked him. Meanwhile, at school, the news spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with rumors, pictures, and speculation. Students scrolled through search engines, their jaws dropping as they confirmed the truth. Nathaniel Carter, the boy they ridiculed, was a billionaire heir. Lucas's hands trembled as he refreshed his phone. Every article, every headline confirmed the reality he refused to accept. He had spent years bullying someone who had the power to buy and sell everything he knew. And for the first time, Lucas felt something unfamiliar: fear. Nathaniel, however, had bigger plans than revenge. He was about to make a decision that would change everything. The boardroom was a far cry from the high school classrooms Nathaniel had grown used to. Here, there were no whispered insults or stifled laughter, only the weight of expectation. The senior executives sat in their leather chairs, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and scrutiny. Some of them had known him since childhood. Others saw him only as a boy with a famous last name. Either way, he was no longer just Henry Carter's grandson. He was their future leader. Nathaniel walked confidently to the head of the table, his eyes scanning the faces before him. "I know many of you are skeptical of my ability to lead," he began. "You've seen me as a student, not a businessman. But I've spent years studying this company, learning every aspect of its operations. I am prepared to step up." The room remained silent for a moment before one of the executives, Richard Lawson, leaned forward. "Nathaniel, your grandfather built Carter Industries from nothing. Leadership requires more than knowledge. It requires decisiveness, vision, and the ability to make tough choices. Are you ready for that?" Nathaniel met Lawson's gaze without hesitation. "I am." He pressed a button on the conference table, bringing up a detailed presentation on the room's large screen. "This is my strategic vision for the company's next 5 years," he continued. "We have the resources to expand into emerging markets, but we need a stronger digital infrastructure to remain competitive. Here's how I propose we do it." As he walked them through his plan, the skepticism in the room began to shift. Some executives nodded, while others scribbled notes. Even Lawson, initially one of his strongest critics, seemed impressed by his grasp of strategy. Henry Carter, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "Nathaniel, this is an ambitious plan, but ambition alone won't sustain Carter Industries. Do you have the resilience to fight for it when the world pushes back?" Nathaniel straightened. "I've spent my entire life fighting to prove myself, even when no one believed in me. I won't stop now." A slow smile spread across Henry's face. "Then let's begin." Nathaniel's transition from student to leader had been swift, but the real challenge was about to begin. Just days after his acceptance into Carter Industries' leadership, an emergency meeting was called. The company's latest acquisition, an innovative startup specializing in artificial intelligence, was facing a hostile takeover from a competing firm. If Nathaniel wanted to prove himself, this was the moment. As he entered the boardroom, the tension in the air was palpable. Executives murmured amongst themselves, their expressions grim. Henry Carter stood at the far end of the room, his face unreadable. Nathaniel took a deep breath and sat at his grandfather's right-hand side, where the weight of responsibility settled firmly on his shoulders. James Holloway leaned over, his voice hushed. "This is a defining moment, Nathaniel. The rival firm is offering a substantial bid to steal our acquisition. If we don't act fast, we could lose one of the most promising technologies of our time." Nathaniel nodded, absorbing the gravity of the situation. "What's our counter-offer?" Lawson, still skeptical but now more open-minded, spoke up. "The issue isn't just about money, it's about strategic positioning. If the competitor gets their hands on this startup, they'll dominate the AI market. Our bid needs to reflect not just a higher number, but a vision that convinces the startup to stay with us." Nathaniel took a deep breath and pulled up the financial reports and market analysis. "Then we don't just offer them money, we offer them something our competitor can't: autonomy and long-term investment in their vision. We secure their future." Murmurs of agreement swept through the room. Nathaniel, once the overlooked student, now had the room's full attention. He looked to his grandfather, who gave him a small nod of approval. "Prepare the proposal," Nathaniel said, his voice steady. "We're not losing this fight." For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged. The boardroom doors burst open as the final negotiations commenced. Nathaniel sat at the head of the table, the weight of expectation pressing on him. Across from him sat representatives from the rival company, their sharp suits and hardened expressions a stark contrast to his youthful confidence. "Carter Industries has made an impressive offer," one of them admitted, glancing at Nathaniel's proposal. "But business is about more than just numbers. Can you guarantee stability and leadership? Investors are wary of an inexperienced CEO." Nathaniel met his gaze squarely. "My leadership is backed by years of preparation and the full confidence of my grandfather. But beyond that, Carter Industries isn't just looking to outbid. We're looking to innovate. Our AI initiative isn't just about money. It's about creating something that will revolutionize technology." The room fell silent. The rival executives exchanged uncertain glances. They hadn't expected such a composed and well-articulated response. "Let's cut to the chase," one of them said finally. "What's your final offer?" Nathaniel leaned forward. "We offer an equity stake in Carter Industries for the startup's core team, ensuring they remain part of our growth. We'll also establish a separate research division under their leadership, giving them the autonomy they need. Our competitor can't match that." Murmurs spread across the room. Henry Carter watched quietly, nodding in approval as the rival team requested a private discussion. The negotiations were working. When they returned, the lead executive extended a hand to Nathaniel. "You've got yourself a deal." Nathaniel shook his hand firmly. The deal was sealed. As the ink dried on the contracts, Nathaniel exhaled, the tension of the negotiations finally dissipating. The executives who had once doubted him now nodded in admiration. He had secured one of the most valuable acquisitions in recent history, proving that he was more than just an heir. He was a leader. Henry Carter stood from his chair, clapping a hand on Nathaniel's shoulder. "I always knew you had it in you," he said quietly. "Now the world knows it too." Nathaniel looked around the room, the realization sinking in. The boy who had once been bullied for his supposed insignificance had now commanded the respect of some of the most powerful figures in business. Meanwhile, at school, news of his triumph spread like wildfire. Lucas watched the headlines unfold, his stomach twisting. He had spent years trying to diminish Nathaniel, only to watch him rise beyond anything he could have imagined. For the first time, Lucas felt regret, not just for what he had done, but for the opportunities he had wasted. Nathaniel, however, was already looking ahead. There were more battles to fight, more obstacles to overcome. But today, he had proven that he was ready for whatever came next. And he knew this was only the beginning. In the days following the landmark acquisition, Nathaniel's life took on an entirely new rhythm. Board meetings, strategic sessions, and high-profile negotiations became part of his daily routine. The media was abuzz with the story of the teenage billionaire who had outmaneuvered seasoned industry veterans, but while the business world celebrated his success, Nathaniel knew he had unfinished business back at school. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit, he stepped onto campus one final time, walking through the hallways that had once been a battleground of torment and ridicule. The air was different now. Whispers followed him, but this time they weren't filled with laughter or mockery. They were laced with awe. Lucas Anderson, the former ringleader of his tormentors, sat alone in the cafeteria. The sight was almost ironic. The same person who had once ruled the school with an iron fist now looked small and insignificant. Nathaniel approached, watching as Lucas stiffened. "Nathaniel, Lucas started, but his voice faltered. He wasn't sure what to say. Nathaniel took a deep breath. "I don't need an apology, Lucas. I just need you to understand something. Power isn't about wealth or status. It's about the choices we make. I made mine." He turned to walk away, leaving Lucas to reflect on his own. As Nathaniel exited the cafeteria, a weight lifted from his shoulders. He had said what needed to be said, and now for the first time he felt free of his past. He walked through the school hallways one last time, knowing that this chapter of his life was closing. That evening, he sat in his grandfather's office at Carter Industries, reflecting on everything that had happened. "You handled yourself well today," Henry said, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "But this is only the beginning. The real battles start now." Nathaniel nodded. "I know, and I'm ready." Just then his phone buzzed. It was a message from Lily. "Proud of you," it read. "Let's celebrate soon." A small smile tugged at Nathaniel's lips. He had fought hard for his place in the world, and now, standing on the precipice of his future, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Nathaniel didn't return to school after that day. Instead, he fully immersed himself in his new role at Carter Industries. He spent long hours in meetings, learning the intricacies of the business and proving himself to those who still doubted him. He knew respect wasn't given. It had to be earned. Back at school, Lucas had changed. No longer the arrogant bully, he carried himself differently, humbled by the realization of what he had lost. He had spent so long trying to tear Nathaniel down, only to watch him rise to heights he could never have imagined. Meanwhile, Nathaniel had one final task before closing the chapter on his old life. He arranged a generous scholarship fund under his mother's name, ensuring that no student, regardless of their financial background, would ever feel like an outcast at that school again. The moment the scholarship was announced, the students at his former school were left speechless. Nathaniel Carter, the boy they had mocked, had given them a gift they could never repay. Nathaniel watched from afar as news of the scholarship spread. He didn't need their gratitude. He had already won in ways they would never understand. With the scholarship fund set in motion, Nathaniel turned his focus entirely to Carter Industries. He had successfully made his transition from an overlooked student to a respected leader. The company thrived under his vision, expanding into new technological frontiers, fulfilling his promise of innovation and growth. Despite his newfound responsibilities, Nathaniel remained grounded. He regularly visited community centers and schools, inspiring young minds who once faced the same struggles he had. His story became one of perseverance, a reminder that resilience could shape destiny. One evening, Henry Carter called Nathaniel to his office. "You've done well, Nathaniel. Better than I could have imagined," he said, his voice filled with rare warmth. "You've proven yourself not just to the world, but to me." Nathaniel smiled. "I learned from the best." As he stood in front of Carter Industries' towering headquarters, he reflected on his journey. From the boy mocked for his worn-out clothes to the visionary leader commanding an empire, he had risen. But this was just the beginning. Nathaniel Carter was ready to shape the future. Months later, Nathaniel stood in his office, gazing out at the city skyline. Carter Industries had flourished under his leadership, and his vision for expansion was becoming a reality. The scholarship fund he had established was helping students across the country, ensuring that no one had to endure what he had. Despite his success, Nathaniel never forgot where he came from. He frequently visited schools, speaking to students about perseverance and resilience. His story had become an inspiration, proof that one's past did not define their future. One evening, Lily knocked on his office door. "You've changed a lot, Nathaniel," she said, smiling. "So have you," he replied. "We both have. But I wouldn't have made it here without people like you believing in me." As they stepped onto the balcony, Nathaniel reflected on his journey. The bullied boy from high school was gone, replaced by a confident leader who had earned his place in the world. And as he looked out at the city, he knew one thing for certain: his story was just beginning. Months passed, and Carter Industries continued to thrive under Nathaniel's leadership. His strategic initiatives had led to record-breaking growth, and he had successfully positioned the company at the forefront of the tech industry. Investors who had once doubted him now lauded his vision and determination. But beyond corporate success, Nathaniel remained committed to making a difference. His scholarship fund expanded, and he worked closely with educational programs to mentor young entrepreneurs. He wanted others to have opportunities he had fought so hard for. One afternoon, he received an unexpected visitor, Lucas Anderson. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow but gestured for him to sit. Lucas shifted uncomfortably before speaking. "I just wanted to say, I was wrong about you, and I'm sorry." Nathaniel studied him for a moment before replying, "It's not about being wrong, Lucas. It's about what you do moving forward." Lucas nodded, seeming to understand. As he left, Nathaniel felt a sense of closure. His past had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. He had built something greater, something lasting. And with that, he turned back to his work, knowing that his journey was far from over.